The silent front of the Middle East war. What would happen if a single country could threaten the entire global energy system? In recent weeks, missiles and drones launched from Iran have crossed the skies of the Gulf, targeting infrastructure inside some of the richest and most powerful states in the Middle East. Air defense systems were activated. Radar screens lit up. Missile warnings echoed across cities that had rarely experienced war. Within minutes, defensive batteries began intercepting drones and ballistic missiles moving across the night sky. But the targets were not only military bases. Some were oil terminals, some were strategic ports. Others were pieces of economic infrastructure that helped power the global economy. And the missiles had come from one direction: Iran. Yet what shocked the world was not only the attacks themselves, it was the silence that followed. Several Arab countries were hit. Infrastructure was damaged. Air defenses were pushed into action. And yet the governments of those nations did not launch a direct military response. No immediate retaliation. No massive counterstrike. No regional war. For many observers, this raised a powerful and deeply puzzling question. Why would some of the richest and most heavily armed states in the world absorb these attacks without striking back? To understand this strange strategic silence, we have to look deeper into the geopolitical structure of the Middle East and the calculations shaping today's confrontation. Because the story unfolding now is not just about missiles and drones. It is about power. It is about survival. And above all, it is about the fragile balance that holds one of the most important regions of the global economy together. The strategic background. The conflict surrounding Iran did not emerge overnight. For decades, tensions have existed between Iran and the Western alliance led by the United States. These tensions intensified after Iran's regional influence expanded through alliances and proxy forces across the Middle East. From Iraq to Syria, from Lebanon to Yemen, Iran built networks of political and military influence that gradually shifted the strategic balance of the region. At the same time, several Arab states, particularly those along the Persian Gulf, formed closer security partnerships with the United States. Countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. Bahrain host American military installations and cooperate closely with Western defense systems. From Iran's strategic perspective, these countries became part of the security architecture surrounding Iran. Not necessarily enemies, but part of the military environment that could threaten Iranian security if a larger war broke out. When tensions between Iran and the United States escalated again, Tehran began preparing a strategy that military analysts describe as regional deterrence. The idea was simple. If Iran were attacked, the consequences would not remain limited to Iran alone. Instead, the entire region would feel the pressure. The geography of global energy. To understand why the Gulf region is so sensitive to conflict, we must first understand its economic importance. Every day, millions of barrels of oil travel through a narrow maritime corridor known as the Strait of Hormuz. This passage connects the oil-rich Gulf region to the global market. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through this strait. Tankers carrying energy resources from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates all pass through this corridor. For decades, this route has been considered one of the most strategically important energy choke points in the world. Any disruption here can send shockwaves through global markets. Energy prices surge. Shipping insurance costs increase. Global inflation pressures rise. And because Iran sits directly along the northern coast of the Strait of Hormuz, it possesses a unique strategic advantage. Iran cannot easily compete with the United States in conventional military power. But it can threaten the arteries of global energy trade. This reality has shaped Iran's strategic thinking for years. The first wave of attacks. When the recent escalation began, Iran launched a coordinated campaign involving ballistic missiles and long-range drones. The targets were not random. Military analysts noted that many of the strikes focused on infrastructure that supports the military presence of the United States and its allies. Air defense systems were activated across the Gulf. Missiles were intercepted in several countries, but some managed to reach their targets. Oil facilities were damaged. Industrial areas experienced disruptions. Ports temporarily halted operations. Although the physical damage was limited in many cases, the psychological and economic impact was significant. Because even a small disruption in the Gulf can ripple across the global economy. Energy traders immediately reacted. Oil prices began rising as markets calculated the risk of further escalation. Shipping companies rerouted vessels. Insurance premiums for oil tankers traveling through the region increased dramatically. And investors began asking a deeper question. Was the Middle East entering a wider war? The Gulf states under pressure. Among the countries affected were several Gulf monarchies that have spent decades building some of the most advanced economies in the Middle East. Take United Arab Emirates, for example. Over the past 20 years, the UAE transformed itself into a global financial and tourism hub. Cities like Dubai became symbols of modern economic development in the region. Airlines, ports, technology investment, and tourism form the backbone of the Emirati economy. But this model relies heavily on one thing: stability. Investors do not move billions of dollars into a region if they believe war could erupt at any moment. And that is why even limited missile strikes create a powerful psychological impact. Similarly, Saudi Arabia has been attempting to diversify its economy through large development projects aimed at reducing dependence on oil revenues. Mega projects, tourism zones, and technology initiatives all require a stable security environment. A full-scale war with Iran could jeopardize these ambitions overnight. Even if Saudi Arabia possesses strong military capabilities, the economic risk of escalation is enormous. The military reality. There is another reason why many Arab states are cautious about responding directly. Iran possesses one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. Over the past 2 decades, Tehran invested heavily in developing ballistic missile technology and long-range drones. These systems allow Iran to project power across large distances without relying on traditional air forces. In addition, Iran has built strategic partnerships with armed groups across the region. These groups operate in several countries and can open additional fronts during a conflict. This network creates what military analysts call asymmetric warfare capability. Instead of confronting stronger militaries head-on, Iran can stretch the battlefield across multiple regions. For smaller Gulf countries, this creates a difficult strategic dilemma. A direct military response could trigger a wider conflict that affects shipping routes, cities, and economic infrastructure across the region. The calculated silence. So far, the response from many Gulf governments has been measured and cautious. Statements have condemned the attacks. Air defense systems have been strengthened. Security coordination with the United States has increased. But direct retaliation has largely been avoided. This silence is not necessarily a sign of weakness. In many ways, it reflects a calculated strategy. Gulf states prefer to rely on the military presence of the United States to deter further escalation, rather than opening a direct confrontation with Iran themselves. This approach allows them to maintain diplomatic flexibility while protecting their economic interests. Because for these countries, the greatest threat is not only military damage. It is the possibility that prolonged conflict could undermine decades of economic development. The global stakes. The confrontation between Iran and the Gulf region is not just a regional issue. It has global consequences. Energy markets are closely watching every development. International shipping companies are adjusting routes. Major economies, from Europe to Asia, depend heavily on Gulf oil supplies. Even small disruptions in the region can affect global inflation and economic stability. That is why world powers are watching the situation carefully. Because the Gulf is not only a geopolitical battleground, it is also the center of the global energy system. The question that remains. Despite the attacks and the rising tensions, the Middle East has not yet descended into a full-scale regional war. But the balance remains fragile. Iran continues to demonstrate its ability to threaten strategic infrastructure across the region. Arab states continue strengthening their defenses while avoiding direct escalation, and global markets remain on edge. The critical question now is not simply why Iran launched these strikes. The deeper question is whether this confrontation represents the beginning of a larger regional transformation. Because beneath the surface of these events lies a much bigger geopolitical struggle, a struggle over influence, power, and the future order of the Middle East. And in the next part of this story, we will examine a crucial issue: why Iran chose to target certain Arab countries more than others, and what strategic message Tehran is trying to send to the world. The countries that took the impact. As the first wave of Iranian missiles and drones moved across the Gulf skies, air defense systems across the region activated almost simultaneously. Radar networks tracked dozens of incoming objects. Some were intercepted high above the desert. Others reached their targets. The strikes did not fall randomly across the Middle East. Instead, they followed a pattern, one that reveals how Iran views the strategic landscape of the region. Among the countries that felt the pressure most directly were several of the wealthiest and most strategically important states in the Arab world. These included Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Each of these nations plays a key role in the global economy. Each hosts critical infrastructure connected to energy markets, financial systems, and international trade. And each also maintains strong strategic partnerships with the United States. But while the attacks caused concern across the region, the actual damage varied significantly depending on the target and the defensive capabilities of each country. Saudi Arabia, targeting the heart of oil power. Among the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia represents the most significant energy powerhouse. The country is the world's largest exporter of crude oil and one of the most influential players in global energy markets. Facilities such as Ras Tanura and other major terminals handle millions of barrels of oil every day. These installations are not just important for Saudi Arabia, they are vital for the global economy. When Iran launched missiles towards Saudi territory, analysts quickly understood the strategic message. Rather than focusing purely on military bases, several strikes aimed at infrastructure connected to oil production and export. Even limited disruptions at these facilities can create powerful effects in global markets. Energy traders reacted immediately. Oil prices began climbing as uncertainty spread across financial markets. Investors feared a scenario in which the Gulf's oil supply could become unstable. Even temporary shutdowns of oil processing facilities can remove millions of barrels per day from the global supply chain. And because global energy markets operate on tight supply-demand balances, small disruptions often create large price reactions. Saudi authorities quickly moved to secure critical infrastructure and restore operations. Air defense systems were reinforced around major energy installations. Emergency protocols ensured that production continued with minimal interruption. But the event demonstrated a critical vulnerability. Even the most advanced energy systems remain exposed to long-range missiles and drone attacks. The United Arab Emirates, a global economic hub under threat. While Saudi Arabia dominates oil exports, the United Arab Emirates has built a very different economic model. Over the past 2 decades, the UAE transformed itself into one of the most diversified economies in the Middle East. Cities like Dubai became global centers for finance, tourism, aviation, and logistics. Major international companies operate regional headquarters there. Ports such as Jebel Ali handle enormous volumes of trade connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. This economic transformation made the UAE one of the most stable and prosperous countries in the region. But it also created a different kind of vulnerability. The Emirati economy depends heavily on global investor confidence. Foreign companies invest billions of dollars in infrastructure, real estate, and financial services. Tourists arrive from across the world to experience its luxury resorts and business hubs. Any perception of instability can disrupt this delicate economic ecosystem. When Iranian missiles and drones targeted areas within the Emirates, even limited physical damage carried symbolic consequences. Airports temporarily adjusted operations. Security measures increased across major cities. International headlines suddenly began discussing the possibility of conflict reaching the Gulf's most important commercial centers. For investors and global businesses, perception matters almost as much as reality. The fear of escalation alone can cause capital to move elsewhere. That is why the Emirati leadership focused not only on defense, but also on communication. Officials reassured investors and partners that the situation remained under control. Financial markets in the country continued functioning. Ports remained open. Airlines maintained most of their routes. Maintaining economic confidence became as important as defending physical infrastructure. Bahrain, a strategic military target. Another country that came under pressure was Bahrain. Although much smaller than Saudi Arabia or the UAE, Bahrain holds enormous strategic significance. The island nation hosts the headquarters of the United States Navy's Fifth Fleet. This naval command oversees American maritime operations across the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and parts of the Indian Ocean. For Iran, this makes Bahrain a symbolic and strategic target. Missile and drone activity near Bahraini territory raised serious concerns about regional security. Air defense systems intercepted several incoming threats, but the incident highlighted the vulnerability of military installations concentrated within small geographic areas. Because Bahrain's territory is limited, many critical facilities exist within close proximity to each other. A major strike could have significant consequences. Yet, Bahrain's leadership, like other Gulf states, responded cautiously. The government emphasized coordination with allies rather than unilateral retaliation. The message was clear. The Gulf states were determined to avoid transforming these incidents into a direct regional war. Economic shockwaves across the Gulf. Even where the physical damage remained limited, the economic shockwaves were immediate. Energy markets reacted quickly to the possibility of instability in the Gulf. Oil prices surged as traders began pricing in the risk of supply disruptions. Insurance premiums for oil tankers traveling through the region rose sharply. Shipping companies adjusted routes to minimize exposure to potential attacks. At the center of these concerns lies the strategic corridor known as the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway connects the Persian Gulf with the global ocean trade system. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this passage every day. If shipping through the strait were disrupted, even temporarily, the consequences for the global economy would be enormous. Energy importing countries across Asia and Europe depend heavily on Gulf oil. Industries from transportation to manufacturing rely on stable energy prices. Any sustained disruption would push inflation higher and slow economic growth worldwide. For Gulf economies themselves, the stakes are equally high. Oil exports form a major portion of government revenue. Ports and shipping lanes support trade networks that link the Middle East to the rest of the world. A prolonged conflict could damage not only infrastructure, but also the long-term reputation of the region as a safe environment for investment. The financial cost of conflict. Military conflicts are expensive, even when they remain limited. Air defense systems must be activated. Missiles used for interception cost millions of dollars each. Security operations increase across airports, ports, and urban centers. Governments must allocate additional resources to maintain stability. For countries with strong financial reserves, these costs are manageable in the short term. But if tensions continue for months or years, the financial burden grows. Investors begin demanding higher risk premiums. Insurance costs increase. Infrastructure protection becomes more expensive, and tourism, the lifeblood of several Gulf economies, can decline if travelers perceive the region as unstable. This is why Gulf governments place such strong emphasis on preventing escalation. Their economic strategies depend on long-term stability. A prolonged war could reverse decades of economic progress. The psychological impact. Beyond physical and economic damage, missile strikes also create psychological pressure. For citizens who have lived in relatively peaceful environments for decades, the sudden appearance of air defense activity can be deeply unsettling. Governments across the region moved quickly to reassure populations. Public communication emphasized that defense systems were working effectively. Emergency response teams remained prepared. Critical services continued operating. The goal was to prevent panic and maintain public confidence. Because in modern economies, stability depends not only on physical infrastructure, but also on collective perception. If people believe their environment is secure, economic activity continues. If fear spreads, even strong economies can slow down rapidly. A strategy of pressure. From Iran's perspective, these attacks are part of a broader strategic calculation. Tehran understands that Gulf states possess powerful economies, but also significant vulnerabilities. Their prosperity depends on international connectivity. Trade routes must remain open. Investors must remain confident. Tourists must continue arriving. By demonstrating the ability to threaten this stability, Iran sends a message. Any major conflict involving Iran will not remain contained. It will affect the entire regional economic system. This strategy does not necessarily aim to destroy Gulf economies. Instead, it seeks to create enough uncertainty to influence political decisions. It is a form of strategic pressure designed to shape the behavior of regional actors. The regional balance. Despite the tensions and occasional strikes, the Gulf region has not yet descended into full-scale war. Both sides appear aware of the catastrophic consequences that such a conflict could bring. Iran possesses significant military capabilities, but it also faces economic challenges. Gulf states possess enormous financial resources, but their economies depend on stability. These realities create a delicate balance. Each side demonstrates strength, but both also exercise restraint. For now, the confrontation remains a contest of pressure, signaling, and strategic messaging, rather than open warfare. Yet the question remains, how long can this balance hold? Because beneath the surface of these events lies a deeper geopolitical rivalry, one involving not only regional powers, but also global superpowers. And in the final part of this story, we will explore the most important question of all: why Arab countries continue to avoid direct military confrontation with Iran, and how the involvement of the United States could determine the future of the Middle East. Why Arab countries avoid a direct war with Iran. After the missile strikes, the question echoed across global media. Why did the affected Arab states not retaliate directly against Iran? At first glance, the silence seemed surprising. Several Gulf countries possess modern air forces, advanced missile defenses, and large defense budgets. Nations like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates rank among the world's biggest military spenders. Yet despite these capabilities, the response from the region remained cautious and restrained. To understand why, we must look beyond the visible military power and examine the deeper strategic realities shaping the Middle East. Because in modern geopolitics, war is rarely decided only by weapons. It is decided by risk. And the risks of a direct war with Iran are enormous. There is a world